Good evening. My name is Ingrid Saunders Jones, and I'm the National Chair of the National Council of Negro Women, and I want to welcome you to this evening's webinar. We will start in just a few minutes. We have over 100 people on right now, and in just a few minutes, Mr. William McFarland with clarification and mediation will come on and give us some tips on how to get the most out of tonight's webcast. Thank you again for joining us. Well, I want to welcome you again. We have well over 140 participants on the webinar, and I thought I'd just take a minute to go over the mission of the National Council of Negro Women, which is to lead, advocate for, and empower women of African descent, their families, and their communities. We accomplish our mission as against four pillars. The first being education, with an emphasis on STEM education for girls. The second is health, the disparities in our communities, with a focus on HIV/AIDS and how it impacts our communities. The third is entrepreneurship and financial literacy. And many of you, I hope, have participated in some of our previous webinars around those issues. And our fourth pillar is public policy and civic engagement. And that brings us to tonight, because tonight's webcast is a part of our public policy priority. In the United States, as we all know, citizens create public policy with their votes. And the origin of this webinar came because of two personal experiences I had. The first was when the last time I went to vote for Barack Obama, as it turned out. I went to my polling place, and I had gotten a notice about 6 weeks before where my polling place was, and it was the same place I'd been going year after year after year. And I went to the polling place, an elementary school, and the school was under total renovation. It is a place where people walked to vote or got off the bus to vote. And it was under total renovation, closed, and no sign to tell us where to go. So I did my own research because I had time and I had a car, and I found my polling place and I cast my vote. Now, the second instance happened just a little while ago, early voting here in the state of Georgia. And I went to the place where I have early voted ever since we've had early voting. And I walked in, and there was no early voting. So I went in to talk to the people in the library where we vote. And for those in the Atlanta area, that's on Campbellton Road, where people can walk and take the bus to vote. And the people in the library said we were expecting that this would be a voting precinct also, but it is not. It took them 10 minutes to find the voting precincts and give me a Xerox copy, and I had to drive 10 miles to the closest place to vote. Now, again, I had the time and I had transportation. The two little ladies behind me probably were my age, but I asked them if they needed a ride. They said that they would go and see if Junior had enough time to take them over to Adams Community Center. So I really started thinking after that first experience that we need to focus on, who is making the decisions about where we vote, how we vote, and all of that within the context of our concern about voter suppression. And then one other thing happened within the last 2 weeks. I was watching Jeopardy, which I watch all the time, and it is the championship season on Jeopardy. And they asked three of the smartest people in the world, how many representatives are there in the House of Representatives in the Congress of the United States? And nobody knew the answer. So here we are wrapping all of those concerns up and bringing them to a webinar that will really serve as the beginning of our connection to empower civic engagement and empowering people to take responsibility again for the public policy that impacts our lives so much. So with that said, I am going to say that we are very grateful to the presenters, and I hope we saw them on the agenda. We have Marcia Fudge, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, who is going to join us. Attorney Celeste McCaw. She is a Comcast NCNW Telecommunications Fellow, and she was tasked with developing the curriculum for not just this webinar, but what will be on our website. We have Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Helen Butler, from whom you'll hear, Executive Director, Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, and our own attorney, Janice Mathis, NCNW's Executive Director. Now, that's a heavy-duty crowd, and I think that we'll learn a lot from them. And so I'm going to proceed on with the introduction of our next presenter, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, the state of Ohio's 11th Congressional District Representative in the United States House of Representatives. She is known in her district and across the nation as a fierce and fearless advocate, an effective advocate for education and for children, women, and families. She is committed to public service and brings a hard-working, problem-solving style to that. Congresswoman Fudge earned her bachelor's degree in business from The Ohio State University and a law degree from the Cleveland State University, Cleveland Marshall School of Law. Her work ethic is unquestioned. She problem solves and she builds collaboration, and that has earned her a reputation among her colleagues in Washington and at home as an insightful leader and knowledgeable legislator. We could think of no more appropriate person to open the webcast and put an emphasis, if you will, on what is at stake. Congresswoman Fudge.
How are you? Can you hear me?
How are you? Thank you so much. I can hear you.
All right, very good. I'm great, thank you. A pleasure to be on this call with you all this evening. I'm sorry I couldn't join you through the actual webinar, but I'm in motion, so I wanted to make sure I could just say a few words. So again, thank you for allowing me to participate. Let me just start out by saying that this November is not just going to be an election day on November 6th. It's going to be Judgment Day. If we don't take this opportunity to put some kind of a check and balance on the president and the administration of this country, we will not be able to change it in my lifetime. It is significant that we understand what really is at stake. Certainly the judiciary off the top. We are now putting in place judges who not only are not qualified, but whose ideology is so extreme that these people will serve on the bench for another generation. We have to look at education funding, which is being cut significantly year after year after year, because they really do not believe that public education is worth investing in. We have to look at things like SNAP. We have to look at what they're doing with HBCUs, with healthcare. The budget we're looking at right now is going to take benefits away from Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. Let's not even talk about our very democracy is at stake, and decency and respect are at stake. But all of the regulations that have been put in place over the last administration are being rolled back to our detriment. Immigration is another huge issue, and I know so many of you think maybe it doesn't affect you, but nobody ever talks about the people who come from Africa or the Caribbean. It is a huge problem as they talk about doing away with the lottery and doing away with other things that are going to affect nobody but Black people. So there is so much at stake that I hope you will stop not only and talk about it amongst yourselves and your friends and your church and your coworkers, but take another step and make sure that you talk to people on your street. Make sure you talk to everyone. Get people registered to vote now so that when we start our get out the vote, everybody's going to be ready to go. And I think that's really what I wanted to say. I hope that that has been helpful, because as I look at where we're going, we are really on a sinking ship. And I think that people feel that they are hopeless and helpless to do anything, but the responsibility is ours, and it's something that we just must do.
Right.
We thank you so much, Congresswoman Fudge, because we know what your schedule is like. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you soon.
Very good. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Right. Yeah, I would like to thank Congresswoman Fudge again for just, laying the foundation for the importance, of tonight's webinar. Before joining NCNW, I practiced law in New York City. So although I'm an attorney by trade, I'm a citizen by right. So as citizens, and even as non-citizens, it's so important that we educate ourselves on the democratic framework upon which this nation functions and within which we function every single day. So that brings us to Voting 101. The U.S. Constitution establishes the infrastructure of our country's government and its fundamental laws, one of which is the right to vote. We vote for our elected officials on 3 levels: the federal level, state level, and local level. As you may have learned in your high school American government classes, there are 3 branches of government. There is the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So on the federal level, the legislative branch consists of Congress, which is comprised of the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the legislative branch is charged with creating our country's laws. The president and the vice president are within our executive branch of government, and the executive branch is charged with enforcing the laws that the legislative branch creates. Lastly, the judicial branch is comprised of federal courts, with the United States Supreme Court being the highest court, and the judicial branch is charged with interpreting the laws that the legislative branch creates and the executive branch enforces. So as voters, we elect the members of Congress, and we elect the president and the vice president, who in turn appoint and confirm these federal judges and members of federal agencies and cabinet members. So voting in federal elections is extremely important. As an example of this importance, I'm going to take this moment to highlight Higher Heights, which is a national organization dedicated to building the political power and leadership of Black women. Yesterday, Higher Heights partnered with Equal Pay Today to speak out on the wage gap of Black women. And they made it clear in their advocacy for hashtag Black Women's Equal Pay Day that in this critical year for our nation and at this pivotal moment for democracy, Black women nationwide, like you, like me, we need to start demanding more for our contributions, our dollar, and our vote. So make sure that you have a voice this upcoming midterm election. Okay. All right. So in general, there are 2 steps to the election process, the primary election and the general election. A primary election is a nominating election. So winning the party's nomination is the first step in the election process. It narrows the field in a political party to one individual for a specific office. So some states hold jungle primaries in which all candidates for the same elected office, regardless of their political party, run against each other all at once. I believe Louisiana holds jungle primaries, but if you want to learn more about this, there is a bit more information included in your handout. The second step to the election process is the general election. And a general election is the election in which the voters make the final choice from among the party nominees and the independent candidates for a specific office. So this year, a congressional midterm election will be taking place. And a midterm election takes place at the halfway point of every US president's term in office. So every US president serves for 4 years, right? And members of the House of Representatives are elected for only 2 years at a time. So every presidential term is punctuated at the 2-year mark by a midterm election for all 435 seats in the House. In addition, the term of a US Senator is 6 years, which means that during every midterm election, constituents will also be voting on roughly a third of the seats in the Senate. So this year, the congressional midterm elections will mostly be taking place on November 6, 2018. So to find your state's registration deadline, you can go to the Voter Participation Center's website, the link to which is also included in the handout. There are different deadlines for mailing in your registration, registering online, or registering in person. So definitely be mindful of that. So ultimately, here's the question of the night. Are you registered? Mr. McFarland will put up a poll for everyone. And while we are waiting for everyone to cast their ballots, for the poll question, I would like to point out a couple resources that you can use to actually see what your ballot will look like on the day of the election, to check to see if you're registered, if you're unsure that you are, and to gather more information on how to register to vote in your state. So one resource is vote.gov, and the second is rockthevote.org. So I'm going to give a couple minutes for everyone to, respond to the poll question and see how we're doing as far as registration numbers.
So we'll go ahead and close the poll in just a few seconds. We've got about 90% of the people voting. So let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And as suspected, 100% of the people who voted, 85% of the people on the call are registered voters.
You know what?
Wonderful.
That is wonderful. Mr. McFarland definitely did tell me that this poll may not be necessary because all of you guys would already be prepared. But those resources that I mentioned, if you have a family member or a friend who has questions about voting, you should definitely pass on the information. And kudos to everyone who's already registered. That's pretty exciting. So now I am going to turn the mic over to Ms. Kristen Clark. Kristen is the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, one of the country's most important national civil rights organization. Kristen formerly served as the head of the Civil Rights Bureau for New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, where she led broad civil rights enforcement on matters including criminal justice issues, education and housing discrimination, barriers to reentry, voting rights, immigrants' rights, gender inequality, disability rights, reproductive access, and LGBT issues. After receiving her undergrad degree from Harvard University and her law degree from Columbia Law School, Ms. Clark spent several years at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Incorporated, and she worked at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. She has written numerous articles and books, including Barack Obama and African American Empowerment, The Rise of Black America's New Leadership. Among numerous other accolades, Kristen Clark is the recipient of the New York Law Journal's 2015 Rising Stars. So thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us. Kristen, are you there? Let's see.
You want to make sure you aren't muted, Kristen.
Okay, she may be muted. So while she's muted, I think we should, come back to her as far as the Voting Rights Act portion of the webinar. And our own Ms. Mathis will introduce Ms. Helen Butler. And Kristen, when you get on at any time, just give us a holler.
Good evening, everyone. This is Janice Mathis. And first, I'd like to say to Celeste, who helped to organize our presentation tonight, she really did the majority of the work on it. Thank you very much. It is amazing. Celeste is a young lawyer, but she's a very good lawyer. She's been a tremendous asset already to us here at NCNW.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I can't think of anything that gives me much more pleasure than introducing my friend Helen Butler. We go a good ways back. I don't want to focus so much on her educational activities and career milestones. I want to tell you a little bit about what kind of person Helen Butler is. She took a small, not well-known nonprofit organization and through sheer determination and conviction has turned it into a force to be reckoned with, not only in Atlanta, but in Georgia and across the country. That's why I'm so pleased that she can join us. We know her in Georgia as Miss Voter Registration. Anything you need to know about registration processes, procedures, rules, when does the Board of Elections meet, what are they working on? I just call Helen. And so when I wanted to delve a little deeper into the purpose and the power of state and local boards of election, I couldn't think of anybody any better. Helen has taken the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda from a noon lunchtime meeting on Tuesday to a regional force that people look to across the region and now across the country to make sure we understand what our rights are, what to do if they're not being fully recognized, and how to maximize the opportunity of citizenship. Helen, thank you for joining us tonight. I look forward to your remarks.
Well, thank you, Janice, and good afternoon or good evening to everyone. And to Ingrid, thank you all for having me as a part of this. And what more can I say about the boards of elections and how important that is, because that's where the rubber meets the road right there, because they are responsible for overseeing all activities with regards to the voting process. Now, most states have also an elected or appointed official that is really responsible for administering and implementing the rules and regulations, but they also work in tandem with the state boards of elections. And these boards of elections also are either appointed or elected, and they may have terms of 2 to 4 years. And they meet monthly, most of them. And those meetings are open to the public. And what better way to get involved and to know what's happening with regards to what laws have been passed, what will be the processes and procedures involved, than being at those meetings to understand how important and how they can impact your access to your power, because your vote is your power. They do have minutes that they actually have at either those meetings. They're recorded, and you can always get them because you want to know what's happening with those boards of elections. Now, they typically work on, as I said, making sure that the laws that the legislature have codified, they actually administer the policy, the rules and procedures that will go with that. They certify what kinds of equipment can be used. They also listen to investigations and make determinations if there are problems that they found, violations with election laws or with ethics and lobbying laws. They also investigate fraud and irregularities. But they also, as I said, are really there to oversee that entire process. And we do not always avail ourselves of that state election board to ensure that we have equity and equality in the administration of our election laws. And because in the United States, our election administration systems are decentralized, we find that the most important part of that election system is your local county boards of elections. And those are responsible for making sure that all citizens are eligible, that they become registered, that you have accessible precinct locations, that you have equality and uniform procedures that people follow when they go to vote. Now, I can tell you, if you've ever encountered an Ingrid, I do apologize because I'm a member of the Board of Elections, that you had to go through those barriers that are put in place. And really, your county boards of elections are the ones that should be ensuring that you have ease of access, that there is no problem for you when you go vote. But you had to encounter that problem. And a lot of counties and states have enacted barriers to voting, like ID laws, like moving precinct locations. But it is we as citizens that can hold them accountable by making sure that we participate in those boards of election meetings. As I said, the county boards of elections are the ones that really do the work. They have basic autonomy to administer the elections, to implement those processes, but they are there to ensure that you get to exercise your right to vote. And we want to make sure that you do that. Attend those boards of elections because once you attend, that puts them on notice that they are being held accountable. And the only way that we can hold them accountable is being participants in that process. The county boards of elections have different makeup structures. Some are probate judges, some are clerks of court, but a lot of them are boards of elections that are appointed or elected. So we need to make sure that we participate, not only by just attending members, that we become members of those boards of elections. And therefore, we can really have a voice in ensuring that all voters have equal access, that there is equitable distribution of resources, that one precinct can't have more voting machines while another doesn't have that. So it behooves us to really become involved in not only our state boards of elections, but also our county and our municipal boards of elections. And they really should represent the makeup of the states in which we function. And I can tell you for Georgia's, it does not represent the population groups of Georgia. In fact, it's all white males. So it behooves us to make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable, but also that we become engaged as a part of our county boards of elections. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about that state or county or municipal board of elections. Thank you for having me tonight, Janice, and it's really good to be with all of you sisters.
Thank you, Helen. We appreciate that. And I think what we'll do at this point is, Celeste, could we stop maybe and take a few questions now? Or we could go on with the schedule as it was originally prepared. What do you think?
I think we should stop. We've given them a lot of information, so I think this is a perfect time to ask any questions if you have them. And Mr. McFarland, if there are any raised hands, let us know. And yeah, so we're gonna open up the floor for questions.
Okay, got a couple of questions that I can assign to you for the last.
Okay.
You can check your questions. Now, I do have a few people with raised hands as well. I'd like to take the raised hands first, or would you like to deal with the questions?
I'll go through the questions and then we can go to the raised hands.
All right.
Okay. So this is a question from Ariana Poole. She asks, what is the relationship of the County Board of Elections to the League of Women Voters?
The League of Women Voters is an independent nonprofit organization. It's really not connected to the county boards of elections. They just work to make sure, just like NCNW, just like the People's Agenda and other organizations, they work to ensure that people have a right to vote. So the League is not really connected with the County Board of Elections. It's a nonprofit organization.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ariana, for your question. Okay, so Helen, what is the website to go to for County Board of Elections information?
If you want to know for the United States, are we talking about for Georgia? If you're Georgia specific, you can always go to the Secretary of State's website, sos.ga.gov in Georgia. But the National Conference of State Legislators has has done great research on county and state local boards of elections, and that's a great way to find out about your particular state. Or you can go to your state's website, because each state typically has a Secretary of State who is the prime election official that implements the laws. So you can go to their website to get information about the local county boards of election and municipal boards of elections.
Okay, great. Thank you, Belinda, for your question. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have sent to me. If there are any raised hands, Mr. McFarland, then we can take those too.
Okay. Now, in order to recognize people with raised hands, I'm going to need help from those individuals, because I see that most people have muted themselves as well. We have a Jericho Williams. I am going to unmute you, Ms. Williams, but you would need to hit that telephone handset and unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My question is not related to anything that Helen just shared with us. I wanted to know if a recording of this webinar is going to be available upon completion tonight. I would love to have it shared with members here in DeKalb County and some of my other networks, whether it's an audio, a video, or a transcript. Will that be available?
Yes, we actually are video recording this session. Mr.
Perfect.
McFarland knows more about the technology behind it, but it's definitely going to be recorded so you can use it as a resource later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Debbie Hillman, you will likewise have to hit the telephone handset to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question. Ms. Hillman.
I, like Derica, just wanted to make sure that there would be a recording that we could share with our members and with other networks.
Okay.
And so the question was answered.
Thank you. Christian Smith. Please hit the telephone handset on your control panel if you'd like to ask your question. Ms. Smith? We'll try Ms. Gamage. Ms. Gamage Ahmed. All right. How about Ms. Poole?
Mrs. Poole actually had her question answered already. The
All right.
County BOE and the League of Women
All right.
Voters.
Thank you. Marion Lark.
Passengers traveling platform 417. I want to volunteer. That's
Lark.
417 services San Antonio and San Diego and 9 o'clock.
All right. We'll try one more.
Mr. McFarland, this is Ingrid Saunders Jones. Somebody needs to mute their phone? I don't know if you're hearing it, but I'm hearing a lot of background noise.
All righty. And that may be one of our presenters. Let's all make sure that we are muted if we're not talking. Hold on for 1 second. Let me mute everyone in there. Unmute. Okay, Celeste, you may want to unmute yourself. I don't have any more questions that I can get raised by, that I can ask with raised hands.
Okay.
And I see
Right,
that Kristen has joined us.
Yes. Well, I think you're muted.
Kristen, can you hear us? It appears
can't
that
hear.
your phone is muted. Maybe we can work on that a little bit.
Yes, Christian, you are muted, but not by the organizer. You would have to unmute your phone by hitting the telephone handset in order for us to hear you.
William, where is the handset?
On your computer screen, on that control panel to the left, there's a tab with an orange arrow at the top and a telephone handset directly under the orange arrow. Can you please tap the icon with the telephone handset? Try speaking to us now. I believe we can hear you typing. You may want to try to talk.
Well, I actually think that was me.
Oh, okay.
Chris, there is a handset on the right of your screen. There's an orange arrow. You should see an orange arrow at the right of your screen. If you could tap that, you'll see a telephone and you can unmute your phone. Do you see it? Okay, well, I think what we better do then is go ahead with some more of the presentation, and we can come back to Kristen. We certainly want to hear from you, Kristen, about
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Good evening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Apologies for the technical difficulties.
No, it's fine.
No, it's necessary. We introduced you earlier and told all the glowing things about you and your work, but Celeste, you want to repeat a little bit of that so Kristen can hear all the wonderful things we think of her?
Of course. So Ms. Kristen Clark, like I said earlier, is the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which is one of the country's most important national civil rights organization. After receiving her undergrad degree from Harvard and her law degree from Columbia Law School, yay, Ms. Clark spent several years at the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated, and she worked at the U.S. Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division. She has written numerous and books and received numerous accolades. And so we are so honored and excited to have you here with us, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to Janice Mathis and everyone involved with tonight's webinar for your leadership. I can think of no other issue more timely or important than voting rights at this moment in our democracy. I will dive right into my presentation, and I want to apologize for the technical difficulties at the outset. I was asked to join this evening to talk about the Supreme Court's devastating ruling in Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder, and its impact on where we find ourselves in the country today in 2018. 5 years ago, the United States Supreme Court under Justice Roberts issued a ruling that gut the heart of the Voting Rights Act. The Section 5 preclearance provision of the Voting Rights Act is one of the most important tools that we have had in the country for the last several decades that has helped to block and deter voting discrimination. The court gut that preclearance provision that required that 16 states, many of them in the South, many of them with very significant numbers of African American voters, obtain federal review of voting changes before they could be put into place. And through that preclearance process, we've literally seen hundreds of discriminatory voting laws that were blocked and prevented from ever going into effect. Since that ruling, we have seen the floodgates of voter suppression open up across our country. On the day that the Supreme Court issued its ruling, Texas moved forward with one of the most restrictive and discriminatory photo ID laws that we have been fighting at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, along with our partners, for the last 5 years. When that law was put into effect, there were literally tens of thousands of long-standing voters who were disenfranchised because they were without one of the forms of qualifying ID. And we've been battling the state of Texas for the last 5 years in federal court. Over the life of that case, we've seen the state take steps to modify the law. There's now an affidavit provision that allows people without ID to nonetheless be able to vote if they sign an affidavit swearing and attesting to the fact that they are without ID. But nonetheless, this has presented challenges for African Americans, Latino, elderly, and student voters in the state of Texas. North Carolina's monster voter suppression law, which restricted early voting hours, which eliminated pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. This was also a law that went into effect after the Supreme Court's ruling. The short takeaway is that the Supreme Court really opened the door to voter suppression with this case, which has made our work as leaders, as advocates, as concerned citizens incredibly difficult when it comes to preserving access to the ballot box for African Americans. It requires tremendous vigilance on our part because local and state officials have absolutely taken advantage of this opportunity where we no longer have the protections of the federal government in place.
to put measures on the books that make it harder to vote. Now, why does this matter? In 2 years, we will embark on the 2020 redistricting cycle in this country. And we have seen that Section 5 preclearance provision operate at its best and at its height during redistricting moments in our country. If you look at the trajectory of Section 5 objections across a decade, you see the largest numbers at the start of the decade when jurisdictions seek to pack Black voters into districts or spread Black voters out across districts in ways that dilute our influence. And through that critical piece of the Voting Rights Act, we've been able to bring some level of normalcy to redistricting and prevent the voluminous numbers of challenges and lawsuits that we would have otherwise seen. So here we are, preparing for the 2020 redistricting cycle without that provision of the Voting Rights Act in place for the first time in more than 5 decades. And now is the time for us to really be working on gearing up, empowering and preparing our communities to be active participants in redistricting, whether you're talking about congressional redistricting, state legislative redistricting, counties, city councils, school boards. It is critically important that we be prepared to turn out, hold our election officials accountable, offer up alternative maps, and speak up where they attempt to take action that would hurt us in the redistricting process. Let me talk a little bit about where we find ourselves right now with respect to the 2018 midterm election cycle. No doubt, local and state election officials are resorting to a voter suppression playbook when it comes to voting rights in our country. And I want to walk through very quickly some of the tactics and measures that officials resort to most frequently when it comes to suppressing our right to vote. Photo ID tops the list. And for many of you all who are watching and listening, I am going to gamble that many of you have driver's licenses and you have cars. I'm going to gamble that many of you fly on planes and have passports. But the reality is that there are many poor people on the margins in our country who rely on public transportation and have no reason to have a driver's license. Many impoverished people who've never been on a plane. And many of those people are disproportionately African American, Latino, and minorities. And so it's important that when we hear photo ID invoked, and we just heard this from President Trump last week at a rally, that we speak up and we speak loudly against this. This is an unnecessary hurdle that peels people off at the margins. And those are the voices that we need in our democracy for it to work. So no doubt photo ID is a tactic number one, and it's important that we speak out against this. Another common tactic that we are seeing that has been pushed by Chris Kobach, who is one of the leading voter suppression figures in our country, is proof of citizenship requirements. May sound innocuous, but let me explain what's so problematic here. In our country, when you register to vote, you sign that registration form. Outside a church or at a county fair, you put your name, your address, you check off that you're a citizen, you write in your address, and then you sign under penalty of perjury that all that information is accurate. That system of registering to vote has worked in our country for decades, but now people like Chris Kobach are requiring that you attach a copy of your birth certificate, attach a copy of your passport to prove that you're a citizen before they'll process your voter registration form. Another tactic that we must push back on, it's all about erecting unnecessary and burdensome hurdles that will peel people off at the margins, making it harder for them to vote. Another tactic is purging people from the voter registration rolls. And here I want to credit the work and leadership of folks like Helen Butler and other advocates who have been vigilant in watching what local officials are doing under the cover of darkness. In Hancock County, Georgia, officials started to hold meetings where week by week they would vote to remove people from the registration rolls. Helen Butler alerted our organization to this. We started to dig in and investigate and found that the overwhelming majority of people that this town was slowly working to strip away from the registration rolls were African Americans. We filed suit and we prevailed, but no doubt voter purges are tactic number 3 that officials are resorting to right now in this election cycle to tilt the balance of power in our country. Polling site consolidations. You hear many jurisdictions saying we're going to create mega centers and take action that will make it easier for people to access the polls, when the reality is that these measures require that people travel greater distances and create unnecessary burdens in order for people to vote on election day. Where you hear talk of new, exciting innovations and mega centers, it's really important that we push back, require that officials demonstrate that poor people in particular will still be able to access these sites, and that if we're taking away localized polling sites that have been in place for decades, that we do so knowing that we are not going to make it harder, if not impossible, for people to vote. I'm excited by a lot of the energy and excitement that we are seeing right now in 2018. The Women's March has made voting a centerpiece of their work and efforts. The March for Our Lives are now engaging on a bus tour where they're working to register young people and folks who have just graduated from high school. This is exciting, but it also means that we need to make sure that these new voters have a resource to turn to so that they can verify their voter registration, and a resource to turn to so that they can report problems if and when they encounter them. At the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, we lead the Election Protection Coalition. Election protection is the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection program. It's anchored by a hotline, 866 Our Vote, and includes a partnership with local and state organizations, including Helen Butler's and the National Council of Negro Women and many others. And these organizations work in collaboration with us to make sure that when problems happen at a local level, that we're surfacing them, that we're troubleshooting them and resolving them immediately. Yesterday, we operated our election protection program in the several states that held elections across our country. And election protection is on the front line fighting back and addressing many of the problems that people encounter. I will tell you, last night as we prepared to wrap up our efforts, we received alarming reports in Michigan where polling sites in one county literally ran out of ballots. Local officials weren't prepared for the high levels of turnout in parts of Michigan yesterday. These are the kinds of problems and challenges that arise every day in elections in our country, and will be problems we encounter throughout the midterm election cycle. I encourage everyone watching this program to integrate election protection into your work and efforts. Promote the 866 Our Vote hotline. Make sure that people are reaching out with questions, with complaints, surfacing issues, and calling to verify their voter registration status, calling to verify their polling site location, calling to make sure that they know about all of the regularly scheduled and special elections that may be happening in their community. I'll wrap up now by flagging two other important issues that must remain on our radar if you are concerned about access to democracy today. The Census 2020 will get underway very shortly. My organization and a number of others have filed suit against the Trump administration over their devastating 11th hour decision to add a citizenship question to the census form. May sound innocuous, but this hasn't happened in decades and is no doubt the kind of question that will deter people from participating in the census. And that includes African and Caribbean families in our country and other African American households that may be home to people who are undocumented and seeking a pathway to citizenship. this is a racial justice issue with tremendous implications. We hope that we'll prevail in this fight, but now is the time to start laying the groundwork and making sure that people understand what's at stake with the census. The census is a tool that's used to disperse billions of dollars in federal funding for schools, for hospitals, for road construction, and so much more. We need to make sure that Black communities get their fair share of those dollars, and the only way that fair allocation happens is if we are counted fully and accurately. So I hope that you will take a moment as you promote the importance of voting and turning out to also let people know it's important to participate and turn out the count in the census. Finally, I'll also note that there is an important Supreme Court nomination now underway. Judge Brett Kavanaugh of the D.C. Circuit has been nominated for the vacant seat on the Supreme Court, and this will no doubt be a bitter and protracted battle. This nomination stands to transform the balance of the Supreme Court for decades to come. And Brett Kavanaugh's record when it comes to voting rights raises grave concerns. He is somebody who signed off on a South Carolina photo ID law that was strongly objected to by the Justice Department. And he's also issued a number of devastating rulings that impact communities of color on cases concerning reproductive rights, environmental justice, and so much more. I hope that people will also take a moment to make sure that they're reaching out to their senator and telling them, do not railroad this nominee. It's important that the Senate take its time to carefully unpack and examine Judge Kavanaugh's record with a particular focus on whether or not he will be fair and impartial on issues and questions concerning civil rights, issues that impact the rights of African Americans under the Constitution, and whether or not he will fairly interpret and apply federal civil rights laws. All of these issues, voter suppression, the census, and the Supreme Court matters if we want a strong, fair, and robust democracy in our country. I'll stop there and thank you, Janice Mathis, for having me today.
Well, I want to thank you, Kristen, not just for being with us this evening, but for the work that you do each and every day. I know how you travel to the far corners of the nation to make sure that our rights are protected and vindicated. I have some idea how much time you spend in Texas. And actually, you were modest. You didn't say that you were able to prevail on some of the issues in Texas, and things would be much worse if it weren't for your work. We love you. We admire you. We appreciate you. We've had some of the most foremost experts on voting rights, Black women, right here on this call: Helen Butler, Kristen Clark, Marsha Fudge, Sherilyn Ifill made a commercial for us. My heart is full of gratitude because I know one thing. There may be those who want to staunch democracy, but I also know Black women. And I know that just like 70% of you voted in 2016 because you wanted to see a certain president get a second term, you're not going to let anybody step on your rights now. So I want to thank you, Kristen. Thank all of our presenters. Celeste, you're just amazing. Helen, you know I love you. But I got to say a word about my chairman. This was her brainchild. I wrote up a little paper. She said, I want to see this as a webinar. And I think we ought to do this for the whole country. Well, you know what? It may not be the whole country, but there are 218 activists on this phone, all of whom are registered to vote. And I know what happens when you have your mind made up. You're not going to be denied. And frankly, if you look at our history, if we were capable of being destroyed, we would have been destroyed by now. And what we face in this election and with redistricting and with census and the Supreme Court is a light affliction compared to what our grandmothers and great-grandmothers had to endure. I know we're up for the task. But let me just calm down a minute, Ms. Jones, and go back to the script, because what I really want to say is to our NCNW sections who I know are on the call, this is a call to action. We've covered a lot of territory tonight, but it won't do us much good to cover it alone. Between now and November 6th, there's one issue, and that issue is let's go vote. Let's go vote. Someone said we need to, I believe it was Marsha Fudge said at the very beginning, we need to rebalance. We need some checks and balances on our government. It's our job to restore those checks. And the way we do that is not just with our vote. That would be simple. We're going to vote. But we need our nephews and nieces, our employers, our significant others, our pastors. We need to, I think about the movie Driving Miss Daisy, which I liked a lot because it was set in Atlanta and Druid Hills. Miss Daisy sat in the back seat. Miss Daisy didn't drive nowhere. Miss Daisy had somebody to drive her. This is a time when Black women need to get in the back seat and tell everybody else where to go, because we know where to go. We've proven that we know the direction. We know how to get there. So how do we do that? There are any number of ways. Let me count some of the ways. We can host town hall meetings. We can write op-ed letters. We can whisper in our pastor's ears and say, Brother Pastor, I need you to talk about voting this Sunday. We can help people with early voting. We can do souls to the polls. If you make up your mind that you want to act, there's no end of the ways that we can be effective advocates and get people to the polls. We can help people get the IDs that they need. We can make sure we go to those Board of Election meetings. And if we hear about changes, precincts being moved, closed, early voting being contracted and not extended, we can shout real loud and tell people about it. And I think that's what Ms. Jones wants us to do at this point, is to make sure that we spread this information. It's good to have the information. It's better for us to spread it among our friends and children. And I would say, take your children. They may not be old enough to vote yet, but I remember my first political experience. My mama made me a birthday cake on October 21st, 1960. And we sat down and watched John Kennedy debate Richard Nixon. And a few days later, we went and handed out leaflets for John Kennedy because she decided that was her candidate. I've been enthralled by politics ever since. Take your children to these meetings so that they can become lifelong activists who understand the power of voting and the power of having a voice. Well, I want to stop there, but I will say this, close with a hashtag. Everything needs a hashtag, right? So our hashtag tonight is hashtag too much at stake. Hashtag too much at stake. Hashtag too much at stake. We want to stop now. We've got time for some questions, and then Ms. Jones is going to close us out. Thank you all very much, and good night. Questions, anyone?
We have a lot of questions. I have a question for Kristen, actually.
Good.
Yes. So, Kristen, do you have a one-page fact sheet outlining, the issues that local organizations can use that discuss in group meetings and for GOTV events?
We have extensive information on our election protection program that are available on our website, lawyerscommittee.org, or you can visit 866ourvote.org. There you can find materials, know your rights documents, and other things that you can print out to support your local organizing, advocacy, and voter education efforts.
Great. Okay. So we have another question too. We have a question from Sonia Ladd. She said, thank you for this information. How can we ensure the location of our voting precinct and or verify our voter status?
Well, I'll just jump in there if I can and say that this is precisely the purpose of election protection and the 866 Our Vote hotline. Everybody who is participating in this important webinar should feel free to integrate that into their materials, put it in their Sunday programs, post it on your social media platforms. 866 Our Vote is a go-to resource to verify your voter registration status, confirm your polling site location, or confirm the election calendar in your community. We hear too many times that people have a hard time getting through to their local registrar or getting a call back. So we encourage people to use 866 Our Vote to support and round out their advocacy efforts.
All right, awesome. Okay, so our next question is from Maria Biller Wright from Charlotte, North Carolina. She said, does offenders on house arrest, can they vote, or are their voting rights relinquished?
This is an important question, and many may know that there are a few states that restrict the right to vote if you have a felony conviction, and it actually varies state by state. Any attempt to register to vote while you're an active felon in North Carolina is a felony. However, after completing all the terms of your sentence, including parole, probation, and paying restitution, you have your rights restored automatically in North Carolina. So if you're not on parole, not on probation, and not paying restitution, your rights are automatically restored in North Carolina. And let me just say that it's a disgrace, those states that continue to restrict the right to vote based on a felony conviction. We know that these laws have a racist history. We know that these laws were put on the books explicitly to keep African Americans disenfranchised. I am very hopeful that efforts, there's a ballot initiative underway right now in Florida, one of the worst states when it comes to felony disenfranchisement. And I'm very hopeful that we'll see that ballot initiative pass. We want all Americans to be able to vote in our country, and it's disgraceful that we would take away that most sacred right merely because somebody has a conviction. And most certainly after you've paid your dues, people deserve a second chance and should be given the right to vote. Thanks for that important question.
Okay, great. Yeah, felon disenfranchisement is a really important issue and topic, so I encourage everyone to continue to research that issue. We also have a question from Lacey Britton. She says, a gracious thanks to our NCNW for hosting this webinar. Will there be any opportunity for partnering with the regional UNCF and Urban League regional offices to inform our local communities of voting awareness?
So this is Kristen. I'll just briefly say that the National Urban League is a proud partner of our election protection effort. And if you have any trouble mobilizing something in your community or getting the support that you need on a local level, please reach out to us at the Lawyers Committee. We're so proud of our partnership with urban leaguers all across the country. We work well with President Mark Morial and would love the opportunity to deepen our engagement with the local National Urban League offices across the country. Election Protection is here to be a resource for you and here to support your efforts.
Great. Thank you, Kristen, for answering that question. So we have one more question that kind of has two parts. It's really interesting. So the first part is it advisable to set up technology devices in adult care facilities and churches in our community offerings to check voter status for those without access to the online site?
So if I understand that question correctly, the person is saying if we don't have access to a website, what can we do to provide resource at the grassroots level? And at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Law, we would be really pleased to partner and work with you to figure out how we get information out in the best way possible for your community. So reach out to us at 866-OUR-VOTE, or feel free to email us at the Lawyers Committee so that we can partner with you. I'm so glad and proud to hear that people are thinking about how to reach down at the grassroots level on these issues.
Okay, and I think this is the last question, which is kind of like the second part to this question. How do you remain nonpartisan and verify citizens' eligibility, to vote?
Well, if nobody wants to weigh in here, I'll just say that it is a myth, this idea that non-citizens are seeking to vote in our country. And I think one of the things that voter suppression proponents have done is that they've pushed this false narrative that vote fraud is widespread and rampant in our country. They push forth this false notion that there are people out impersonating the dead on election day, that there are undocumented people who are racing into polling sites on election day. When you think about the climate in our country right now and how dark it is, the last place you'd find an undocumented person is inside a polling place interacting with government officials and bureaucrats. So I really reject, just because it's not supported by any empirical or real data, the notion that this is a problem we need to fix. People who push proof of citizenship are really pushing a problem, a solution in search of a problem. This is not a real issue. The real issue that we face in our democracy today is that too many African Americans are locked out because of laws that restrict the right to vote based on a criminal conviction, that turnout and participation rates are not higher because of photo ID laws and other barriers and hurdles that people face. We need to figure out how we make it easier for people to vote in our democracy today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I don't have any more questions on my end. Mr. McFarland, I don't know if there are any raised hands.
There are a few raised hands. Excuse me. If we'd like to try and take some of those questions, we can.
Yeah, we have time.
Celeste, let's take 2 raised hand questions and then kind of head to our wrap up.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Ms. Graham, would you like to ask your question? Althea Graham. How about Ms. Larch?
Larche?
Larche, I'm sorry. Well, how about Ms. Muse? Cynthia Muse.
You know, William, they may have had their questions answered.
That is possible. We'll try one more.
Okay, ask them and give them the process for unmuting one more time.
All right, let me see. It's self-muted. Phineas, the organizer. Miss Johnson, you should be unmuted if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, you can.
Thank you for having this very informative webinar. Learned a lot this evening. But my question is, I live in Virginia, and I have 2 relatives that are coming to live with me. They are over 20, and they're going to college here. Now, they're registered in their states, but they will be here during the 2018 election. And I wanted to know, do they need to register here, or would they have to send in an absentee ballot?
So in the state of Virginia, a college student registers to vote the same as any other applicant. And this is from the Virginia Department of Elections. So if they deem themselves a resident of Virginia, where they are attending school and where they are living in a dormitory or otherwise, they have the right to vote. A dormitory or college address is an acceptable residential address when it comes to registering to vote and does not disqualify you from voting.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. Very good. I want to make sure they are registered here and they're able to vote. So very good. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Jones to give our closing remarks.
Well, I am very excited. I want to harness that excitement by first thanking our presenters. So Congresswoman Fudge, I will thank her when I see her this weekend. Helen Butler and Kristen Clark, will not be the last time you work with NCNW. That is for sure. I also want to thank Janice Mathis, of course, who is the executive director, who laid out a charge, and I'm going to come back to that. But Celeste McCall, we thank you for taking a concept and an instruction and just blowing it out. Now, what you see on the screen is an abbreviation of what Ms. McCall will have on our website. And I think from the Q&A, Celeste, we know that we have a lot of information that we need to gather to put on our website. And then we'll do a general, we'll promulgate this information to those on the webinar. And let me just say, we have at this point, and I'm looking at Sinquay over here, 200 and how many? 200. Oh, we're down to 199. A couple people have signed off, but we went up to 212. I would like all NCNW members and all of our webinar participants to understand that this information is being provided for cascading. I think all of our collegiate members should have this, all of the sections and all of our community-based sections. We will share this information with all of our affiliates, and in the aggregate, that's over 2 million women. And it's going to be women, especially African American women, who are going to make a difference in this midterm election and in elections 2 years after that. So what we know is we've heard about access to democracy. We know we have election protection issues. We have so much at stake, and we will package all of this up and in a form that can be used, and thanks whoever asked that question. So we're going to close by thanking the program committee of NCNW, chaired by Paulette Norvell Lewis and members Belinda Petroso, Davida Mathis, and Linda Bagley, and thank all of the NCNW member participants and anyone else who joined. I do want to make a call to convention. We're having our convention in Washington, D.C., November 9th through 11th. And you could go on our website and have information about that. We have webinars the fourth Thursday and Friday of each month. We focus on financial literacy and entrepreneurship on Thursday and millennial entrepreneurship on Fridays. We love you all. If I could kiss you, Helen Butler, Kristen Clark, I would, and I will the next time I see you. Janice Mathis, I'll see you on Friday, and Celeste McCall. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Give yourselves a round of applause.